Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS Legal Hotline lawyer, and this is another episode in the series entitled There's a Form for That. And today we are talking about Form 22Z, or at least we're starting our conversation with Form 22Z, the additional signer addendum. So, Camden, let me tell you about a hotline question I received just last Friday. Okay? Broker says, I am writing an offer for buyers and there are 7 buyers. It's 3 couples and a parent who are purchasing this property. How do we write the purchase and sale agreement to identify 7 buyers? And what's the answer to that question?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's not as hard as you think. Either you can put them all on the buyer line if you can fit them all, but then you would use the 22Z, the additional signer, to list the rest of them and have them all sign, because there's not room on 21 for them all to sign.
That's right. They all have to sign because it's not a binding agreement unless all the buyers have signed.
Yep.
What if it was a revert? What if these people buy the property and then a year later they want to sell it? So now we've got 7 sellers.
Same thing. You have to use the additional signers because they all have to sign. They're all owners of the property.
Right. So all that 22Z does is replicate the signature blocks that are on Form 21 below all the boilerplate or below all the agreed terms, right? So where you have the buyer and seller sign on Form 21, 22Z, just think of it as an extension of those signature lines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so 21 provides enough space for 2 buyers and 2 sellers. If you've got more than 2, 22Z adds them all.
Yep.
Here's a different question.
Okay.
I didn't get this one last Friday, but I've gotten this one many times. Question goes something like this. Buyer is one, let's just say it's a couple, and they get partway through the financing process. So they're in mutual acceptance with the seller.
Okay.
They're partway through the financing process when they learn they aren't going to get financing. But if parents, let's say their parents join in to the purchasing process, then they will qualify. Okay. But now there will be 4 buyers. Can I just add a 22Z and put mom and dad in there?
No, because you're already under mutual agreement with 2 buyers. So the only way to do it then would be to use a Form 32 assignment of buyer's interest, assigning it from those 2 originally to all 4 of them, even though 2 of the buyers are the same people.
He's right. It seems complicated, but it's really not all that complicated. Seller's going to have to agree. We're changing who the buyers are. We're changing the buyers from whoever the original ones were to them plus parents. So we're changing who the buyers are. Seller is going to have to agree.
And with that change, it doesn't reset any of the timelines. All the timelines stay the same. If you had an inspection contingency still, granted in your scenario you said you're farther along in the process, your financing contingency, all those timelines that were started at mutual acceptance don't start over just because you assigned it to another buyer.
That's right. I said a minute ago, seller's going to have to agree.
Yep.
Is that always true?
No.
When might that not be true?
That's where and you probably have done a video on it. If the buyer is the 2 individuals and or assigned, at that point the seller's already agreeing to allow the buyer to assign their interest to someone else.
That's right. So if the purchase and sale agreement is written so that on Form 21, paragraph 2, the buyer identification includes the buyer names, whoever the buyers are, and it includes the words and or assigns, then when seller signs that purchase and sale agreement, seller has already consented to the assignment of that purchase and sale agreement to whomever buyer may want to assign the agreement in the future. And in this case, if they want to assign it to themselves and their parents, it would be simple.
Yep.
They would not need seller's consent. They would simply use Form 32.
Correct.
There's a form for that,
That's right.
Form 32, the assignment agreement, and buyer would then be the assignor. They would assign to themselves and their parents as assignees, and then Camden's exactly right. The assignees step right into the shoes of the assignor. No timelines change. Seller's consent is not required because buyers were identified as buyers and or assigns on the Form 21.
Yep. And I'm sure there's a whole video on pros and cons of that from a seller standpoint too.
There is, and we're not going to cover that right now.
Nope.
But what if buyer wasn't identified as and or assigns? Is an assignment still the best way to handle this scenario where we're changing from 2 buyers to 4 buyers?
From a seller standpoint, if they're agreeing to it, yes, because it doesn't reset the timelines. Otherwise, you could terminate, let's say they have a financing contingency and they aren't able to get financing. They could terminate based on their financing contingency and put in a new offer with all 4 of them, but that resets all the timelines and starts everything over.
Right. So if seller is going to consent, then the seller can consent to the buyer's assignment.
Correct.
The parties would want to make that a separate, you could use a Form 34 attached to the original purchase and sale agreement for seller to consent to buyer's assignment. Buyer could then use Form 32 to make the assignment. And what you need to understand is that in addition to what Camden said, the timelines don't reset, Form 32 also does not relieve the original buyers of their liability under the contract. So seller never signs Form 32 because seller never releases the original buyers from the purchase and sale agreement. So in our scenario, we've got the 2 original buyers plus 2 more buyers. Probably not that hard to imagine that seller's not releasing them from liability. But let's say that you use Form 32 to make a wholesale replacement of the buyer. Fred enters the purchase and sale agreement and gets replaced by Martha. In that scenario, even though Martha becomes the buyer at the closing table, if Martha fails to close, Fred is still liable to the seller.
Yep.
That's it.
That's it. 22Z adds more people. 32Y assigns 32 assigns buyer's interest to somebody else.
That's right. If you have questions on this topic or any other, visit warealtor.org, follow the links to the Legal Hotline library, and ask me a question. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.